Hello and welcome back to Thoughtumentary, the podcast dedicated to the audio documentation of fundamentally interesting thoughts that I have captured in my mind stream and discuss in detail so that upon discovery that other people find these thoughts interesting, I can expand upon the ideas and elaborate further. Today I would like to discuss reincarnation, which is a word that has been riddled with doubt, skepticism, and generally carries a reputation that it lacks evidence. Those proclaiming there is no evidence, usually, if not always, referring to scientific evidence, which is evidence of the physical nature derived from the scientific method. But the idea itself dates back to the earliest foundations of Hinduism, Buddhism. I don't actually know which one came first. It doesn't really matter to me. But I would guess Hinduism predates Buddhism. And the idea of reincarnation is not far from the afterlife, which is much more common in Western religions, which in my opinion is ultimately derived from both curiosity and fear, perhaps evenly, throughout history. The bewilderment of what happens after we die, once we close our eyes for the last time. The fear of what happens, the nothingness that follows, the unknown. You could say, and I think you'd be accurate in doing so, that we humans are born with an innate sense of fear. Fear of death, which is the original fear. But strangely, we do not fear that which came before birth, which, logically, I think, is close to the same thing. Reincarnation is perhaps an idea, ancient though it is, far more accurate than that of the traditional afterlife. The idea that within our bodies is contained a divine and eternal soul that is liberated upon the death of the body and thereby elevates, levitates, passes interdimensionally from this realm into the next, whether it's heaven, nirvana, purgatory, whatever the case may be. And the reason I think that reincarnation is more intelligent and more likely to be true is because, unlike those in recent history, usually proponents of science, modern science, I believe that reincarnation has recently, as a result of man's more recent understanding of the cosmos, gained quite a bit of scientific proof in favor of the argument. The argument being that reincarnation is true and it happens to all of us. Now, I use that word in its traditional sense, as I mentioned, the Buddhist Hindu belief, which goes a little something like this. The humans originally articulated it in a way that you are born, you live out your human life here on earth, and almost as if against your will, you are reborn into another human life, or those more progressive in the belief, into other creatures, other animals living on earth. Some of the more pessimistic followers of those religions don't want to be reincarnated, whereas others, particularly those of a Western origin, think that the idea of reincarnation is a very pleasant one. The idea of being ultimately immortal and undying is an attractive idea because we all have been raised in a culture that is deathly afraid of death itself. I mentioned that this is something we are born with, the fear of death. But I don't know that that's really true. Because after all, I don't have memories dating back to my first moments in the human body, the human experience. And I doubt you do either. In fact, I don't think we can reasonably accept any person's recollection of the first moments in the human experience because, for whatever reason, this knowledge or this memory is hidden from us, which means we cannot understand what the experience was like before birth. Which is why, after about 2 million years of man on the planet, we still have no idea what happens to our consciousness after we die. In this discussion, however, I would like to expand upon the original meaning of the word reincarnation, because mankind has come a very long way since these ideas were first formed. An ancient Hindu or Buddhist monk, for example, couldn't go on NASA's website and look up pictures taken by the Hubble Space Telescope, which I believe to be one of the most useful and impressive modern inventions. I'd like to talk about that later in a separate episode. But if they could, thousands of years ago, look up on their smart device and see a time-lapse, a photo taken of a cosmic megamaser barreling its way through space several light years away at incomprehensible speeds, swallowing other galaxies and throwing others aside, they may have developed a very different interpretation of reality or life as we know it today. Given our now elementary, but compared to thousands of years ago, astronomical understanding of the cosmos today, if we're going to take the idea of reincarnation seriously, we can only deduce that if we are reincarnated after death in one form or another, that the process is not restricted to the planet Earth or to humanity itself. The only reason I could possibly come up with for a person to, after living one human life, proceed to live another almost immediately, which, if you're talking about the timeline of the universe, the span of 50 years is less than a moment. The only reason I can think for that to be the case is that, number one, we do have some sort of conscious decision to make after death. In other words, we're able to decide where and what we reincarnate into, even when. And if that's the case, the only reason I can think for a person to want to come back to this tiny little planet in the spiral arm of an average galaxy for another 70-some years is because that person is either totally entranced with the planet Earth itself, awestruck by its majesty, the beauty of this planet, suggesting that Earth is an exceptionally wonderful place compared to the majority of the cosmos, which is perfectly likely. I won't deny that. I won't deny that as a probability. Or that this person who has decided to reincarnate into a human again is totally in love with humanity itself and can't stand to be apart from it. Now, this scenario, I think, is extremely unlikely, and I think that the original belief in reincarnation in the Hindu and Buddhist religions is a result of a much lower level of awareness than we have today. And I'd be very interested to hear what the leaders of these religions think about the possibility today. But the way I see it, because we now have such an increased awareness, or at least the ability through technology, through our experience as a species, to be far more aware than we were thousands of years ago, when people still believed the Earth was flat. Well, I should say, when that was the prevailing belief system. That the Earth was not only the center of the solar system, but the center of the universe, and that all life on Earth was placed here by one process or another to supplant human life and sustain it. But let's get to the potatoes of the discussion, shall we? And that is, have we recently discovered scientific proof suggesting that if prevailing theories of today are to be true, then reincarnation is incontrovertibly true as well? Now, how is this possible? I'll tell you. It's very common of leading scientists and physicists today to repeatedly share some very enlightening knowledge that we've recently discovered. And that is that every atom in our bodies, every atom on this planet, is traceable not only to protostars billions of years ago that exploded and consolidated via cosmic gaseous clouds known as nebula, into the modern-day solar system, including, of course, the Sun and the Earth. And this process can be traced back, if this line of thought is to be accurate, to a single point of origin, a singularity, an explosion, known as the Big Bang. No one has found any proof suggesting that the Big Bang is untrue, and in fact, we're able to observe in real time the expansion of the universe, suggesting the aftermath of an incomprehensibly large explosion. So let me reiterate that for you in case it was a little confusing. Every single piece of matter, pieces, talking about protons, neutrons, electrons, things that you can't even see with your eye because they're so small. Every one of those things, there's a countless number of them on this planet alone, shares the same point of origin as everything else in the cosmos. So in one sense, to say that the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, that the Milky Way galaxy is 13-something billion years old, that the universe itself is 17, whatever measurements we've come up with, trying to quantify how long this process has been going on, it's all kind of moot when you think about it. True, the formation of the Earth as a terrestrial planet may have only been organized in this globe for 4.6 some billion years old, but the materials, the constituents that it's comprised of, are just as old as the universe itself. And you say, well, that's not true, because heavy elements, like the elements of life, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, etc., those were all elements formed in massive stars more massive than our own, and some only via super hypernova explosion. Yeah, that's true. But those elements, let's take oxygen for example, those building blocks, if you will, those protons are just as old as the oldest hydrogen atoms we can find, because those hydrogen atoms eventually fused into heavier elements. You see, they're all the same age. The Earth is the same age as the universe. You are the same age as the universe. And this is quickly becoming scientific fact. That's what's so remarkable about cosmology today, or physics, or chemistry, really any field of study. A good example of this, my father sent me an article recently of a local university. I believe it's Northwestern University. They've been conducting a study, I can only assume through computer simulation, suggesting that a very large percentage of the atoms in the Milky Way galaxy immigrated from a handful of other far distant galaxies via these extremely fast intergalactic winds. These are winds of atoms traveling, I don't know how fast, incredibly fast, close to the speed of light, or at least half the speed of light, moving very, very fast in interstellar space. And they try to play this off like this is a shocking discovery. Like, oh my goodness, the elements in the Milky Way do not originate only from the Milky Way. And to myself, I'm just kind of face-palming. I mean, I'd like to be excited for these students. But you see, they're not really discovering anything new. What use is the knowledge that atoms move between galaxies if we've already discovered and decided, well, I won't say as a species, but at least as a scientific community, that everything in the cosmos shares the same point of origin? By this sense, every atom is an immigrant, because they're all traveling through uncharted space, and we all came from somewhere. So let's circle back to the idea of life. There are many forms of life. They're what we call basic life forms. These are single or multi-celled organisms. Even an insect could be considered a basic life form, though I wouldn't consider them that. I mean, the sheer biology complexity of a mosquito, as unpleasant as they are, is mind-boggling. Humans, of course, throughout history and today, believe that they are very special. They are an exception amongst all the other life forms on the planet, and this subconscious belief, something we're so convinced of, is the reason why we're conquering the planet and refusing to share it with all the other life forms on its surface, including those like trees, plankton, that keep us alive, things that we need to survive. But let's say, just for the sake of argument, and to be more in line with the belief of reincarnation and what it's meant historically, that human beings are the only conscious life forms on planet Earth. And what I mean by that is something with free will, something that knows it's alive, something capable of putting a harness around thought, something with a mind, a spirit. Incredibly mysterious classification. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that human beings are the only life forms on Earth with a conscience, which is a part of the human being that is not physical. It is metaphysical by its definition. And this is what is in question. The question is whether or not this thing, this metaphysical identity of ours, persists after the physical existence ends. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, I believe is something that science may never be able to prove. And if it does, it probably won't happen for us for thousands of years, because the complexity of such an equation, quantifying the human being and its metaphysical parts, is just something far beyond our evolutionary capacity at this time. But I do believe we can conclude by the end of this discussion that a more basic, more primal form of reincarnation has been happening since the beginning of time, and that is as follows. I'm going to explain a process that takes place over billions of years using only a few sentences, or at least do my best, which should illustrate for you really the essence of this idea and why I find it so interesting. When you die, whether you're burned or buried, whether you decompose in a building somewhere, all of the atoms that comprise your human body eventually return to the dirt. This is something that is not new. It's not a new idea for us. If you're dead, somebody burns you, you get turned into ashes. Somebody spreads those ashes. They either end up in the ocean or on the landmass somewhere and are eventually, quite literally, recycled into the constituency of the planet Earth. I suppose you could make an argument that a very small percentage of your human body actually escapes into outer space. But I don't think anyone's spent much time studying that. So when this happens, probably takes, a couple 300 years, depending on the situation. You're quite literally churned through the iron core of the planet. This is a process that happens very, very slowly. But all land on this planet is moving. Land including the ocean floors, obviously the continents. It's being melted into lava, magma, circulated through the iron core of the planet and exuded via volcanoes in the form of new material, which is ancient, as you know, as old as the planet itself, and by extension as old as the universe itself. And this matter is eventually broken down into its various elements, the elements of life, reorganized and consolidated into new life forms. Does that make sense? Take the dinosaurs, for example, or the massive trees that existed in their lifetime in the Jurassic era. I know I said this was going to be a few sentences, but it's quickly getting out of hand. Those dinosaurs have been dead for millions, hundreds of millions of years. They have long since decomposed into what we commonly call fossil fuels, believe it or not, which is primarily carbon. But what it really is at its core is organic matter that is liquefied far beneath the crust. The first life forms that lived on Earth billions of years ago have already been recycled. The evidence of their civilizations, or simply their very existence, long lost in geological time. And the same will be the case for us, especially if we don't leave this planet, and the planet Earth itself, in not too long from now, speaking, of course, in the cosmological timeline. For the sun will eventually swell, and in a whirl of atoms, erase the planet Earth and consume it entirely. It will slowly fizz out and implode, scattering gas and plasma into the far reaches of the solar system. It'll probably become a neutron star or brown dwarf, something of that nature. The point being that this matter, probably not enough of it to consolidate into a smaller solar system, though it could. Light a matchstick on Jupiter and you might find yourself giving birth to a new star. But most likely, it'll just condense into planets, moons, other celestial bodies, asteroids, whatever the case may be. I don't know what sort of chemicals will result from the sun's death cycle. But it's likely that there won't be another life-sustaining solar system afterward, just because the sun itself is pretty small, but who can say? So the matter that was the human civilization, human beings, everything we ever knew or created, everything we dreamed about in the physical world, that fancy car you want that you'll probably have later in life, the house your grandfather built, the table you grew up eating Sunday breakfasts on. It's all there, floating in space in the form of plasma and superheated gas. The atoms persist. Eventually, somewhere along the line, this matter floating in space will collide with another solar system, or it could be swallowed by a black hole. And of course, the Milky Way galaxy itself is a time bomb, really just an inordinate volume of matter orbiting around a supermassive black hole in the center, which will all eventually be consumed, either by that black hole or another one. You see, nothing is ever wasted in this universe. It was Einstein that discovered that light is comprised of photons, that we are still unto this day incapable of calculating its mass, but that the mass is undoubtedly there because light is bent ultimately by gravity. Everything that isn't darkness, that isn't void, that isn't that mysterious nothing between stars, is matter. Energy is matter, matter is energy, whatever. String theory. My point is that every single atom in this universe is recycled at one point or another into new matter. And you might say, well, that's true, I can see that, but when the Earth dies and it's turned into a nebula, basically, I think it's very unlikely that this matter becomes other life forms like us. Well, of course you cannot know, but let's say, for instance, that's true. Are you really so arrogant as to think that the Earth itself is not alive? Or that the sun is not alive? These are ancient beings. They're far older than us. Who wouldn't want to be reincarnated into a star or a planet? Talk about immortality. I'm not saying that the ancient Hindu Buddhist belief that one human reincarnates into another, perhaps in the next generation or those following after. I'm just saying it's extremely unlikely. But at the same time, I'm saying that that belief system is scientifically proven. Excluding all of the metaphysical complications like a conscience, a soul, or a spirit, the actual physical body of those human beings is reincarnated in the form of new matter, and often on a life-sustaining planet like Earth into new life forms. So when you eat a broccoli, that broccoli's molecules become you, and then you defecate what you don't use, which ultimately makes its way back into the crust, and then it becomes a carrot, or a pea, a lettuce. And when you die, and the insects, the bacteria, the fungus feast upon your nutrition, you become them. And this cycle is endless. Now, if you want to envision yourself as an eternal being, which I think we've already clarified you already are, considering that the atoms that comprise your body, literally, as far as we can tell, don't have a life expectancy and are at least 15 billion years old. But let's say you wish to live and experience the universe eternally, as I think most of us probably do. Then to update this belief, this idea of reincarnation, which is still yet unproven, we must view life, this life, the average life expectancy of a human being 79 years, as a single television channel, if you will. And you, the observer, have the remote, the dial. And you're flipping the switch, you're flipping through the channels, and there are an unlimited number of them. You watch, you view, you observe the universe through the eyes of a countless number of life forms strewn about all throughout the universe, and trillions of planets. You can view the universe from the perspective of Alpha Centauri, or a far distant alien, not unlike a fly, making its way through the gaseous ocean of a planet many light years away. And this process goes on and on forever, as you do. And that when one of these channels, say your identity, the person you are, the name you were given, your social security number, your birth date, when that channel comes to an end, there's no reason to fret or become depressed over the notion of that channel going off the air, because after all, there's so much more to see. Let me know what you guys think of this idea. The modernization of reincarnation, we'll call it. Whether or not it's supported by scientific evidence of today. And be sure to follow me on my other outlets, which will be listed on whichever platform you're listening on, for future ideas, and of course, share your own so that I might select them and make a future episode out of it. Thank you for sharing this thought with me.